Welcome to my major assessment for contemporary Aboriginal issues. My name is Wendy Rohrlach and I will be discussing self-determination and why my introduction into Aboriginal affairs is considered of vital importance to many Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people, leaders and organisations. To do this, we will look at what is meant by self-determination. We will look at Aboriginal history since Western settlement, including that of self-determination versus self-management. We will also break down the issue to the varying parties involved and how each different party is affected. We will look at a community where self-determination has had a positive impact. We will see how self-determination impacts on different aspects of the communities. Oxford Dictionary says the meaning of self-determination is the process to which a country determines its own statehood and forms its own allegiances and government. This means that the changes cannot be made until the country's right to self-determination is recognised. Put in context, the process of which a person controls their own life, meaning that it is through the exercise of self-determination that we maintain some control. History books show us that the Aboriginal has been treated abhorrently and they were not given the same rights as the rest of the Australian population. 1901, Commonwealth of Australia formed. Indigenous Australians are excluded from the census and the lawmaking powers of the Commonwealth Parliament. 1949, Australian Citizenship Act gives Indigenous Australians the vote in the Commonwealth elections if they are enrolled for state elections or have served in the armed forces. 1962, all Indigenous people are given the vote in the Commonwealth elections. From 1937 through to the mid-1960s, the policy of assimilation was carried out by the Commonwealth and states, stating the destiny of the half-caste native lies in their absorption into the white community. During this time, in 1941, child endowment was introduced in Australia. However, this only applied to non-Aboriginal people. And in 1946, we see the Aboriginal child was able to attend school. However, first they needed a medical certificate to do so, and all the parents of the white children needed to agree to their attendance. 1967 held a referendum where finally the right of citizenship was granted to Aboriginal people, and in 1972 Gough Whitlam led the Labor federal government to adopt the policy of self-determination for Indigenous communities. This policy was described as Aboriginal communities deciding the pace and nature of their future development as significant components within a diverse Australia. This was changed to self-management when Malcolm Fraser came into power in late 1975 as the leader of the federal coalition government, and the focus was on Indigenous communities managing the government project, funded locally, but with little say in what projects would be created. Between 1983 and 1996, both self-determination and self-management were used as key principles in Indigenous affairs policies until 1991, when Keating began the reconciliation movement. ATSEC was established in 1990. Although still under the government, ATSEC was a group of elected individuals who were able to oversee what happened to Indigenous Australians and Torres Strait Islanders. One of the most negative things to occur was the dissolution of ATSEC in 2004, an Aboriginal governed body who assisted the Aboriginal initiative and programs. This department was dissolved without any consultation with Aboriginal leaders.
Self-determination is important. We can't be self-determining if we don't know, what's affecting a decision. So we should be able to make decisions without any coercion.
Until people actually make real decisions about things that affect their lives, it's very difficult to make progress. This is perhaps at the heart of self-determination.
September the 13th, 2007, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary of the United Nations, read out the address to the Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues. This was met by tribulation by the people who had been fighting for over 20 years to have their human rights recognised. Within the declaration, the fundamental rights enjoyed by the Western population was decreed to extend for all humankind. These are the rights of the foundational rights: life and security, language, culture, spiritual identity. education, information and employment, participation, development, and economic and social rights, rights to country, resource and our knowledge, and the right to self-governance. There are great comments from Nick Goddard and Tom Calmer as they touch on self-determination. The Declaration is a very powerful tool for the Aboriginal and their rights for self-determination. There are two very important Indigenous issues which have been impacted heavily by self-determination within the Aboriginal communities. They are health and the justice system. As our rights with the perspective of the Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginal are marginalised against the Western traditional health system, we see that in the communities where the health system has been determined by the Indigenous themselves, the holistic approach is taken into consideration on valuing their culture, encouraging each other to participate and ensuring that the control is maintained by the community. The report on the perinatal deaths in Australia 2013 to 2014 tells us the perinatal mortality rate alone for Indigenous for the period of 2005 to 2014 has dropped by 17%. However, this is still 61% higher than the non-Indigenous people of Australia. Since the Royal Commission into the high number of deaths in custody of Indigenous people, there has been an agreement formed between the Victorian justice system and the Aboriginal people. This has been running for the last 18 years and is the longest running agreement in the nation. They are now in the fourth phase of this agreement. It strengthens the Victorian Government's commitment to self-determination, working in partnership to improve justice outcomes, and supports the recommendations made by the Royal Commission that the Indigenous communities are given self-determination. Pratt and MacDonald point out in their paper, Fine Words and Crocodile Tears, that self-determination for Indigenous communities would challenge the non-Indigenous who have a mistrust and fear of multiculturalism and how this would affect the Western Australian way of life. Back when ATSIC still existed, the chairman, Dr. Gatching Kuru, stated that the new relationships envisaged between Indigenous and other Australian need to be based upon equity in outcomes and that all parties must recognise that Indigenous people possess distinct rights. The principle of self-determination is central to this. A lot of the confusion and mistrust comes through the misconception that self-determination means that the Aboriginal will have their own sovereignty and that Australia will have two sets of government. But there is a positive aspect which relates to the human rights issue. And as Pratt and MacDonald tell us, in the context of human rights, addressing important Indigenous issues such as health, education and empowerment, Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders to participate in that process confirms Australia's commitments to human rights for its entire population. We have two different groups of leaders to talk of. We have the Indigenous leaders and we have the Australian government. The Indigenous leaders, elders, are desirous of the best for their people and to heal the hurts of the past. They know that self-determination is the way they can keep their cultural identity and history alive. For the government, there's the governing of Australia and the way we are viewed to the rest of the world on human rights and treatment of the Indigenous population. Organisations are funded by government and need to ensure that they follow the government's Aboriginal policies for future funding. Every year, the government funds programs to assist with the solution to the Indigenous disadvantage. The majority of the funds are directed to the Aboriginal affairs and not directed to the communities where the funds are required. See the YouTube presentation from Keir Dow, The Solution to Indigenous Disadvantage. In order to be suitable for government funding, all organisations are required to have Indigenous policies and reconciliation plans. Organisations report consistently on the Aboriginal statistics. This too is linked to funding. Marianne Coconut tells about the transformation she has seen in Nafferman in recent years. She has been a resident of the community for the past 70 years. Marianne tells how families are starting to take better care of their children, resulting in no children currently needing the use of the Children's Safe House. The YouTube documentary was created 3 years after the community had got together and formed their own 10-year plan for the community. Now you have approximately 40 people employed in learning trades and making their own accommodation. They've also made a childcare centre and updating the community centre, library and council offices. There is now a buzz within the community And although there is still a way to go and still domestic violence, they have started the journey to change. The Mayor expands on the vision that he has for the community to bring new businesses to the town, including tourism trades, and look at the possibility of a resort and caravan park and the jobs that these two will bring to the community. Napranum is a community on the west coast of Cape York, Queensland, 6 kilometres south of Weipa and 800 kilometres northwest of Cairns, with a population of approximately 957 from the 2016 census. To complete the documentary, Mary reflects that it is nice to build the nice homes and infrastructure, but the main thing is to build the self-esteem within you, to change the way you think. If within yourself you haven't changed, there is no use to change your surroundings. It needs to be the choice of the Indigenous throughout Australia to be willing to accept whatever happens to see the change. Please go and see the YouTube video. Throughout this presentation, you can see that self-determination, if it is implemented from a strength-based practice, will go a long way for closing the gap between the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous communities in Australia. The subject is so complex that the report has only touched on some of the aspects of self-determination. What the report has shown is that the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have not been treated fairly since colonisation and have until recently been denied their basic human rights. Australia is struggling to catch up and make amends for the wrongs of the past, and there is distrust and anxiety on all sides about the path forward. There would need to be education to the non-Indigenous that by ensuring that the Aboriginals have the right to self-determination, it is not a path for secession from the mainstream government, rather than an adjunction to benefit all Australians and improve the life of the Indigenous Australians.